financial crisis. It has also exposed structural weaknesses in many economies and highlighted long-standing social stresses, supporting the need for countries of operations to develop more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive economies for the future. Growth is expected to return in 2021, although the pace of recovery is likely to vary depending on both the pace and success of the vaccine rollout and the availability of additional fiscal space. You might have already heard of the K-shaped recovery curve, which, according to JP Morgan analysis, is the COVID-19 recovery path of two trajectories. Large firms and public institutions with direct access to government and central bank stimulus packages will make some areas of recovery faster, but leave others, such as SMEs, cyclicals, blue-collar workers, and the poor. In this context, I would like to say that the EBRD's support for SMEs, small medium enterprises, is one of our flagship capabilities, and we would, of course, be looking for the opportunities to smooth the uneven K-shaped recovery for the SME sector. EBRD's operational response from the onset of the pandemic was swift and decisive through a solidarity package and continuing investments, through which up to 21 billion euro is anticipated to be channeled to countries of operations by the end of 2021. As a result, a record 11 billion was invested in 2020, mainly to existing clients to help them with cash flow and liquidity. Turkey was the top recipient of EBRD funds in 2020 and in recent years. Last year, we invested 1.7 billion euro in Turkey, mostly for the benefit of the private sector operators. Liquidity and trade financing facilities represented a big part of our activities. We also financed the public health sector through the first ever sovereign project in Turkey. As we are slowly heading for a post-COVID era, and given Turkey's resilient economy and relative ability to recover from shocks quickly, continued growth in 2021 is a realistic prospect. But much, of course, depends on the pandemic management, macroeconomic stabilization, and reform implementation. The EBRD investment in Turkey in 2021 will very much depend on this as well, and on the demand of the private sector. Then looking further ahead, if you've ever heard of the expression be back better or building back better, this is what we also have in store for Turkey, and this is what it means for the EBRD. The bank is well equipped and experienced to help countries to recover from crisis and build an even better future in post-crisis times. As economies become more stable and recovery takes hold, the EBRD will do everything possible to help its countries of operations and its clients to recover, strengthening further the quality and impact of its activities. And the bank will use this opportunity to reinforce its support to countries of operations to accelerate the transition to economies which are more competitive, inclusive, green, well-governed, resilient, and integrated. These are the essential characteristics of a sustainable and well-functioning economy. As the Chief Risk Officer of EBRD, I would like to emphasize that these ambitions should be pursued with the utmost regard, not only to the traditional financial risks, including inter alia, credit risk, and market risk, but also, and increasingly more prominent, the non-financial risks, such as operational risk, be it technology risk, process risk, change management risk, people risk, or information security risk, and of course, reputational risks. However, there's another category of risk that is becoming fast, the overarching kind of risk on a global scale, and most critical of all in any future scenario that we can think of. And this is climate risk. Climate-related risks encompass potential risks from climate change, carbon transition risks arising from the changes in policy, such as the application of a greenhouse gas tax, changes in demand, legal and reputational costs, or from physical climate risks, such as floods, fires, and changing temperatures. The impact of these changes could affect the commercial viability of the bank's counterparties. As part of the bank's risk management requirements and to meet the bank's commitment under TCFD, which is the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the bank has committed to assess climate-related risk considerations for all projects in a standardized way and in line with market regulations. Furthermore, EBRD is actively seeking to mitigate climate risk through the creation and pursuit of climate-related opportunities. You have hopefully heard about the Paris Agreement, which is an international treaty with the goal of holding the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2% degrees above pre-industrial levels and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. In July 2020, the EBRD set out its Green Economy Transition, also called GET, approach for 2021 to 2025, and committed to aligning its activities with the principles of international climate agreements, including principally the Paris Alignment, the Paris Agreement. Paris alignment of EBRD's financial flows is anchored in Article 2.1c of the Paris Agreement, which commits signatories to make finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. The EBRD's approach to aligning its activities with the Paris alignment is an integral part of the bank's activities to support its countries of operations on climate action. At each project level, the bank is seeking to facilitate transition of its counterparties from the current energy generation mix, which is primarily reliant on fossil fuels, including natural gas, to the generation mix that would be primarily reliant on renewables such as solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, and bioenergy, a small portion of gas, and no other fossil fuels. At the policy dialogue level, EBRD is engaging both with the country and local level authorities, as well as on the supranational level, such as in the upcoming 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties, also called COP26, in Glasgow on the 1st to 12th November this year, where parties will discuss how to accelerate action towards the goals of Paris alignment and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. As the latest EBRD's Strategic and Capital Framework 2021-2025 shows, the bank's work in the next 5 years will be underpinned by 3 cross-cutting strategic themes, which are at the heart of a better future: supporting the transition to a low-carbon economy, addressing inequality of opportunity, and accelerating the digital transformation. Our strategic priorities reflect our commitment to contribute to the glocalization, as they will guide our work locally in each country, but with the global agenda of sustainability, inclusion, and technological innovation in mind. These strategic priorities have also been promoted by my president, Mrs. Odile Renaud-Bassot, during her first visit to Turkey in early May in a virtual format, given the ongoing lockdown and number of cases in the country at the time. The EBRD president was first of all impressed by the private sector, its dynamism, its broad and strong consumer base, and should conditions improve, including in the EU, Turkey's main trade partner, a rapid capacity to recover. Importantly, the bank's largest private sector clients praised EBRD's uninterrupted and steadfast engagement with the country during the last 3 difficult and volatile years. We would want to keep strong focus on private sector, which represents more than 95% of EBRD's investment in recent years. Secondly, the EBRD president very much appreciated the strategic importance of championing the green agenda. As Odile said in her Bloomberg interview, we are working with a lot of banks, industries, municipalities. Cities like Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir are part of our green city agenda. The visit was an opportunity for Odile to meet and sign an important memorandum of understanding with the municipality of Istanbul, now part of our Green Cities network, and green transition was a topic in all of her meetings. The European Green Deal, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, and Paris Agreement ratifications are critical elements that need to be in place to driving the future of the Turkish industry's competitiveness. And it was great to see the policymakers are well aware of this and discussions are ongoing. Our president welcomed the fact that the private sector sees EBRD as an instrumental player in this field. EBRD's proposal to align all of our financing with the Paris alignment by the year 2022 was explained by Odile to all ministers she met. At the same time, she also explained the policy challenges we still face in the renewable energy sector, notably on FIT and local content. And we are glad that the Turkish authorities offered their cooperation in this regard. Country ownership is at the heart of both the Paris Agreement and the EBRD operating model. We are also pleased that EBRD is seen as the strategic partner in the introduction of new technologies and research and development to help energy and transport infrastructure sectors to get greener and digitalized and smarter. Finally, EBRD's president got convinced that Turkey could emerge stronger from the coronavirus crisis if it implements reform measures and achieves stability and predictability that investors crave. Last but not least, the EBRD president also took the chance of her virtual visit to express her hopes for the country to remain committed to the inclusion and gender equality agenda, which not only is a key priority for the EBRD, but is also at the top of the agenda of many of our clients as well. We regret the Turkish government's decision to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention, but the EBRD will remain committed to promote the gender agenda in the country while cooperating with the authorities in the many areas where we overlap. The bank will continue to extend financing and advisory facilities for women in business, to support women through vocational training programs, and to push for a roadmap to increase the presence of women on the boards of local companies. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for your attention and reiterate that in all of our future scenarios, we see EBRD to remain committed to Turkey and in particular to the advancement of the inclusion agenda and the long-term decarbonization path in the country. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Annemarie, Straathof, thank you very much. Before going on, I would like to remind you that you can use the hashtag Istanbul from 2023, and on the other hand, on YouTube and on Facebook from the field of Dünya Gazetesi, you can give your comments and ask your questions. And for the next panel, I would like to invite the Honorary Chairman, Mr. Yavuz Canevi. And also, I would like to invite the CEO of DenizBank.
And also, Dr. Turan Dallara, Chairman of US Board and Advisor Partner, Partners Group USA, former Managing Director, Institute of International Finance, and Professor Dr. İlter Turan, and Tran, and also George Hujo from Galileo Global Advisors, Chairman and CEO. I'd like to invite all to the stage, and the floor is yours. Thank you. Mr. Yavuz, can you please unmute yourself? Yavuz Bey, right now we are on mute. Can you please unmute yourself? Yes, thank you very much for warning me. I guess right now you can hear me, right? Yes, yes, we can all hear you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving the floor. And I'd like to thank Annemarie from EBRD for this great perspective that she has given to us. Our meeting, our panel, will be hosting very valuable speakers. We have 5 important panelists, like we have discussed beforehand. First and foremost, I'll give the floor to Hakan Ateş. And then we have 3 international guests, and they will deliver their speeches in English. And at the end, we are going to have a wrap-up. So this is the way how we are conducting our session. I guess all our guests are listening to simultaneous interpretation. I guess there is no technical error because just the beginning of the panel. Now I'll give the floor to Hakan Ateş. Yes, Hakan, the floor is yours. Thank you so much, esteemed chairman, esteemed participants, and esteemed attendees. Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to deliver my speech in front of such an important audience. Annemarie, EBRD Chief Officer, talked about climate change, and also she talked about the support that EBRD has provided to our country. And in the beginning of my presentation, I'd like to congratulate the 20th anniversary of EBRD and for Istanbul actually. And I'd like to thank EBRD for providing huge contribution to our country. And she mentioned a virtual visit, and I had the chance to talk to Ms. Bosso. And in that virtual meeting, we discussed about women employment and also the projects in the agricultural areas and bringing small scales and also sustainability, energy efficiency. We had a very valuable exchange of information, and in that respect, our financial mechanisms will be effectively used. Yes, esteemed guests, COVID-19 is a health pandemic, but everybody has locked themselves into their houses, and the supply chain of the factories have stopped. Both demand and supply side of it have turned into a shock, and it has turned into a crisis. Unfortunately, there is no way to be exempt from any harms of the COVID-19. On the health area, there are many harms, and there are many deaths and many cases. Right now, we can talk about 1,006 billion doses of vaccinations, but we need more than 10 times of the number of the vaccination right now in order to vaccinate the whole world, and it must be repeated in some intervals. We have been discussing it with Mr. Tran, and he said that this is the new normal, and we have to get accustomed to that. This is the IMF figures, 3.3% global GDP growth was expected. Unfortunately, it shrinked by 3.3%. So 114 million numbers of employment loss happened, and it equals to 4.3% of the total employment. And the global debt stock increased 30 trillion, and it increased up to 249 trillion. This is a record. And $84.5 billion is the global world GDP. So we can see we have indebted a lot. In the past, before the pandemic, $60 was the limit threshold for poverty. And 30 million people was expected to get out of the poverty pit. Unfortunately, on the contrary to that, 90 more million people was added to the poverty scale. We are talking about quarantine applications and vaccination and also social distance. And on the economy side, some steps have been taken for recoveries. On the fiscal policy side, indebting has increased. Credit sides and loans, social transfers, and on the developing and developed countries, were equal to 10%, 11% of the GDP, but on the developing countries, because of the lack of resources, it remained on the 7% level. And in Turkey, banks and public banks and some private banks provided support, and it is almost 11%, but majority of it was mobilized through banks. These are credits, loans with guarantees. In order to manage the costs, a low interest policy has been sustained in the world. This is like a vicious cycle actually at the end, because in the US it is 0.25, in the UK it is 0.10, in ECBD it is minus 0.10. These are the policy interests, but on the G7 countries, we are talking about a monetary expansion, so enlargement, expansion. In the 2009 crisis, it was $1.7 trillion, but right now it is $1.8 trillion. So Fed balance has increased, and also ECBD total balance has also increased. In total, unless this fiscal support had not been realized, according to the calculations, the loss of this pandemic could have been 3 times more than this current number. And vaccination actually provided faster recovery than we expected. And in 2021, 2022, global economy is going to improve. And China and the United States have almost gone back to their pre-pandemic Q1 results, according to IMF data, of course, but we are talking about some employment losses and increasing inequalities. They have created big impact over economies in the developing countries and less developed countries. Yes, there is very high liquidity and also inequalities on the supply, and there are postponed demands, and expenditures are increasing, inflation is increasing, and the interest rates are also rising. So these three actually are feeding one another, and Turkey has bared witness to that, unfortunately. And in developing countries, this process might start in the future. There's an increasing interest rate, and flight to quality has been brought according to that. So the number of the resources entering into the developing countries compared to previous years have shrinked. And on the other side, in order to solve health problems, distribution of the vaccination to all the countries in the world must be definitely finalized. In developing countries and less developed countries, vaccination distribution is going a bit slower. And we know that developed countries has already purchased the vaccination in advance. And we have made just a new agreement with BioNTech. We are going to have 120 BioNTech vaccination and 100 Chinese vaccination, and 20 million of the vaccination will be provided from Sputnik 5. So it's just a cocktail like that, but it must be definitely enabled logistically very fast. So in this recovery period, previously EBRD Chief Risk Officer has also mentioned that intersectors, there has been a K-shaped polarization. This is, according to my opinion, not only creating changes among sectors, but it is also creating K-shaped changes among countries, because let's assume this is the X angle. Some sectors are rising, like pharmaceutical sectors and technological sectors, but some sectors like contact-oriented, for instance, accommodation, transportation, and hotels, they have just gone very below than the average. But we all know that there is a postponed demand after the pandemic in some destinations. For instance, I know it very well through our shareholder in Dubai. There is no way to find a vacant room in Dubai hotels. So there are some winning sectors and losing sectors, and we can see this polarization. For instance, tourist numbers has decreased by 74%. And according to World Tourism Organization, $1.3 trillion was the loss in the tourism sector, but technology shares in Nasdaq increased by 43%. When we look at developed countries and other countries, we can see that savings of the developed countries, their production abilities, of course, made a huge difference. Their vaccination is going on very well. In the USA, it is 54%, and in the UK, it is 53%. But on the other side, developing countries and the less developed countries, we assume that there is almost $86 trillion of debt, and petroleum and tourism. So their revenues are dependent on the common goods. And vaccination is going very slow in Turkey, in Brazil, for instance, and we are a bit slow and lagging behind in catching up with the digital technologies. Like I have previously mentioned, in the fund flows, because of the uncertainties and risks, getting benefit of the funds in developing countries, there are not many potentials. In the last 3 years, we have only seen $33 billion of fund and money inflow to the developing countries. But in the past years, it was much higher than this. And it has brought brain migration along with that, which is independent of the time and the place. So people just want to go to different places just to be employed with higher prices. Unfortunately, it leads to a very high qualified personnel loss for those countries. So if I'm to wrap up all these important factors in the end of my speech, I can tell you that we have to adopt this kind of changes. So first and foremost, if we want to adopt those changes, we need to come up with a solution for the vaccinations, and it is not possible unless states provide support. For instance, in our country, we are an SME country. I mean, more than 99% of our enterprises are SMEs. So if they are supported and reimbursed and endorsed very significantly, they can actually recover themselves. So state programs must be definitely taken into consideration, because indebtedness ratio of Turkey as of 2008, 28 of the GDP was increased up to 40%, but unfortunately it is not at the correct course, and reforms must be made starting from the legal reforms. I believe that we can find better solutions. We can just come out of this vicious cycle. This vicious cycle could be turned into happiness circles. We have this chance still because we have a very young population who are very agile, who are very much aware, and we can get many unicorns out of this population. We have great potential actually. In order to solve unemployment, new skill sets must be definitely created, and our EBRD Chief Risk Officer has pointed out very well, education must be covering multi-skills in a skill pool. So youngsters must be supported. If we can bring all this together, our society can get out of the mid-income level trap. And on the other side, our social life has, of course, witnessed a very fast transformation. Many things are not dependent on time and space. So we have to just turn ourselves to innovation. So it is not about what you do right now. It is about the thing that you do with what kind of production methods and in what time. So there is the K-shaped countries. If we want to be involved in the uprising countries, we have to turn our faces to innovations, and we should definitely produce technology. We should not be a country which only consumes technology, and we should be able to have our intellectual property rights, of course. I believe it is very possible if we take the qualifications of our people's potential into consideration. Thank you very much for giving the floor to me. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank Forum Istanbul and to you. Thank you so much. Hakan Bey, thank you very much. You are a very pioneer banking person, as an executive, as a doyen executive person. You have provided a great positive perspective to us. Both the problems of Turkey and the solution ways for those problems have been put forward by you very well. Of course, we are not over with you. You will have another round at the end. Now, if you allow us, we are going to be giving the floor to Dr. Charles Dallara. He spent his half of his life to solve the problems of the globe. He's a very prominent friend of ours, and he is a very close supporter of Forum Istanbul. Now I'll give the floor to him. Yes, Mr. Dallara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yavuz Bey, for that kind introduction. Yes, are you ready for me?
Yes, sir, you can proceed. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much, Yavuz Bey, for that very kind introduction. It's a great honor for me to participate once again in Forum Istanbul, especially to celebrate its 20th anniversary. It's been my pleasure to participate in the past on a number of occasions. I've always enjoyed the gatherings and the dialogue you have organized, Yavuz Bey, and I think that we all look forward to an early occasion when these Forum Istanbul gatherings can once again be done physically in Istanbul. Let me congratulate, though, you and your chairman, Hakan Akar. I hope you're still on, Hakan, for this special 20th anniversary. It's wonderful to see so many of my friends and so many distinguished Turkish leaders in this program. I note that not only Yavuz Bey are you chairing this panel, but that my good friend Gazi Erçel is chairing another panel. I think we all are aware that both you and Gazi served with great distinction as central bank governors of Turkey in the past, and we are honored to be part of this program with you. Finally, let me say what a pleasure it is to be part of this panel with so many other distinguished speakers. I've enjoyed very much the opening comments by Annemarie, but also the presentation by Hakan Ateş. You know, Yavuz Bey, I love TEB, but I still think that the logo of Hakan's bank is the best logo in the world, the helm of a sailing ship. I tried to borrow it from him when I was at the IIF, but he would not let me. Maybe I just wasn't negotiating quite strong enough. But seriously, it's wonderful to see all of you, including my good friends and colleagues, Tran and George, whom I look forward very much to listening to. My comments this morning will concentrate on three issues. I'll try to pace my comments as I know they are being translated into Turkish, but I do not wish to take a huge amount of time. The first issue will be on the US economic recovery. You know, the panelists, the program organizers have asked us to look to the future and to find our crystal balls. And I think most of us on this panel are old enough to realize by our age that we do not really have crystal balls. It's hard enough to see around the corner, much less to extrapolate current events and anticipate future evolution. Nevertheless, as Abraham Lincoln once said, the best way to predict the future is to shape it. And so I think we should not only take from that, of course, very few of us have the opportunity to influence history the way President Lincoln did, but I think each of us can have our impact through our words and deeds on how the future evolves. My first point on the US economic recovery is that I have rarely seen a recovery that's being so mismanaged. And let me explain my concerns here. The US economy has been poised to rebound for quite some months. It will inevitably be a rather unruly rebound, as the job market has to undergo dramatic adjustments to changes in job preferences, to changes in job demands, and to changes in job skills, as well as relocation of millions of Americans as a result of the pandemic. Rather than allowing this process to unfold, the Biden administration has decided to stimulate in a fashion that is bound to end up in difficulty. The first job I ever had coming out of college was as a gunnery officer in the Navy. I was taught one cardinal rule, that if you put too much powder at the bottom of the projectile, you will not send the projectile further. You will actually explode the gun. And I'm afraid this is a bit what the Federal Reserve and the US government are doing today. By overstimulating the US economy, we are recreating inflation risks that the US has not seen in nearly half a century. These risks are real, and they cannot be explained away by transitional factors. I will share a brief story before moving on to my second topic. When I joined the Treasury in 1976, we were coming out of a difficult recession created by the oil price quadrupling as a result of the embargo of 73, 74. Some of you, like Yavuz, may actually be old enough to remember this. Not everyone here will, but it was a difficult time for the US. It was a difficult time for the world economy. Inflation began to creep up. The government decided the solution was to create buttons that said when, whip inflation now. The buttons didn't work. We wore the buttons, but they did not work. Inflation crept up and up and up, approaching double digits, and the US dollar declined precipitously. Budget imbalances and external deficits led to a point of serious demise in the US economy. The only fix was a severe tightening of US monetary policy led by Paul Volcker in the fall of 1989. This was a necessary medicine, but it cost the US economy severely and helped lay the basis for the debt crisis of the 1980s. If the Federal Reserve and other central banks do not awaken soon, they may find that they have walked into a trap partly created by themselves, but a trap also fed by the markets, because the markets are already signaling that their tolerance for high inflation is not so great. Let me shift gears now and talk about a different set of issues which concern me, focus on the US-China economic, financial, and political relationship. We have witnessed a dramatic miracle in China's economy over the last decades. This miracle was fueled not only by ample labor in China, but by China's ascension to the World Trade Organization in the early 2000s and its integration into the global economic fabric. Today, this relationship has evolved into a much more difficult set of issues that involve competition and tension at every corner. I think we are going to have to begin to live with this tension and this competition for the next 2 decades. And I think we had better become accustomed to it, because it is not just a trade issue. It affects virtually every aspect of international relations: trade, investment, financial flows, security matters, technology, and of course, military competition. I think as we adjust to this new reality, the world will not be able to simply stand by. It would be an ideal world in which countries did not have to choose sides. But I think inevitably, the situation raises some fundamental questions about priorities and values. Let me not sketch out my own prescription there, but shift to a third set of issues, which I think loom over the future of the world economy as we move out of this horrific pandemic-induced recession. And it relates to the values that we wish to have embedded in our economic system. Do we really value economic and financial freedom? If we do, then we are bound to voice our concerns by the general drift, and I don't mean just in authoritarian governments, but the general drift in democratic governments toward less and less freedom of choice in our economic systems. The drift of central banking policy interfering in so many corners of financial markets has created dramatic distortions in our market structures and left us at sea when it comes to determining the fundamental values of economic and financial assets. We have also become increasingly accustomed to a growing presence of government and regulation in so many corners of our economic lives. Some of this regulation may well be necessary, such as in the environmental area, but some of it is going to interfere with the fundamental competitiveness of our economic systems if we are not careful. This is not just a sickness of authoritarian governments, but seems to be a byproduct of the drift of democratic governments mixed with various brands of populism. It's a concern that persists well beyond the 4 chaotic years of Trump, and something we should all be concerned about as we contemplate the future of the world economy. Thank you so much for your time this morning, Yavuz. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow colleagues.
Thank you, Charles. In such a very short period of time, you made a world tour and you reminded us about our age as well. So, but we are proud of it, don't we? So, of course, I remember 1976. Of course, I remember the petroleum crisis. Of course, there are those who have forgotten it. Thank you very much. We definitely need such wise brains as yours. Once again, thank you very much. You stay with us again here in this panel, and I will give the floor to one of the loyal friends of panel from Istanbul, George Hugo. And he is also a lawyer and also, as you said before, I guess is going to say a few things about regulation, I suppose. And I give the floor to Mr. George. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Yavuz, and congratulations to the forum. Like many of us, I'm sorry that I cannot be in Istanbul. I think that listening to what Charles has been saying and the predecessor, I am going to express a concern. And the concern is that despite all the regulatory efforts that we have made, the level of risks that exist in the system today has become unbearable. You were mentioning, Charles, the monetary policy risk, for which I agree entirely. But the number that the IMF came in is staggering. We have seen fiscal stimulus in the world for an amount of $16 trillion. This is the most important shift from the private to the public sector since World War II. And we are not at war. The reality is that we continue to believe that we will be able to solve some of our key risks by injecting cash and injecting money. I think we are facing a much bigger challenge. And that the challenge is the challenge of the containment of markets. And I would like to focus particularly on one subject that has been very important to me. Unless we manage to shift from shareholder value to stakeholder value, we are running the risk of a revolution, socially unbearable. The stock market has increased 70% since the bottom of last year in the United States. The wealthy have become more wealthy. But on the other side, while we see that in the medium salaries and the high salaries, we are back to 2019, in the lower end of the employment, we're down 25%. That is 1/4 of the blue-collar population not having a job. The cost is huge, and we need to recreate a value system where markets are no longer in charge. Markets have to reflect the reality, but they have become the beginning and the end. That has an impact on the global geopolitics. And it basically disenfranchises countries like Turkey and a number of emerging markets, because the money that comes in and out is in most cases speculative. And you cannot count on it. It's not because all of a sudden people are going to inject money and buy Turkish shares that they are not going to sell them in 6 months. But we also live in a polarized world. And I would like to finish on that one. We are not going to be able to avoid the splitting of the world between two blocks. The closeness between Russia and China is extraordinarily worrying. It is essential that Europe and the United States, even though they have differences, rebuild the Atlantic alliance that existed pre-Donald Trump. For Turkey, the question is between Ankara and Istanbul. And the problem is that in the last couple of years, we have seen Ankara taking decisions that have confused all of us. Is Turkey going to become democratic and free? Or is it going to go to a Russian-type system? The future of the economy and the investments of the private sector in Turkey will need an answer to that question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsieur Ujou. Of course, your accumulation of knowledge makes you a really wise man in actually interpreting these matters in an overall manner, and you have given Turkey also a message. And I suppose we are going to talk about this in the end of the panel as well, because I would like to have the opinion of our panelists in the end. Thank you very much. And now again, I would like to give the floor to the former IIF member and who has worked also with Charles Dallara, but right now is working as an independent member in the Atlantic Alliance, Tran. And he has also contributed to the forum 2 times in the previous years. So he already knows the perspective of Forum Istanbul, but on the other hand, he also is following very closely what's going on around the world and is also talking and also writing articles about it. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tran.
Well, thank you very much, Yavuz, and the organizer of Forum Istanbul for inviting me again. It's my honor to join you. Again, congratulations for the 20th anniversary of the Forum Istanbul. And I'm really looking forward to 2023 to join you again for the centennial event to celebrate the centennial of the founding of the Turkish Republic. I usually listen to Charles Dallara's advice, and this time I try to deviate a little bit from his advice because he said that we really at our age should know that we don't have crystal balls. So since I still have a few years to catch up with him, I try to offer to you my view and my take on what we should expect in the future. So a sort of a small crystal ball. Basically, if you look at the pandemic, it reveals only our own vulnerability to viral outbreaks, of which there are thousands of zoonotic virus out there mutating every minute, and some of them will become transmissible to humans at some point in the future. But more importantly, it has revealed a world in disarray, driven by distrust, resentment, and competition. Basically, it confirms that the development under Trump in the previous years has ushered in a new Cold War. While there are still debate about whether or not the term is justified, in my view, it is to describe the overarching and overall risk environment that businesses and citizens have to navigate in the future, because it meets the criteria used by scholars to describe the previous Cold War between the US and the Soviet Union. First, there is an ideological struggle between the two sides. This time, it is not just about capitalism against communism, but basically it's about rivalry of governance models, as the European Union has described it, or as the Biden administration has rephrased it, irreconcilable differences over core national values, basically respect for human rights and democratic rights of the people, and international rules and norms of state conduct. And more importantly, Biden administration has emphasized that China has to change its behavior before there can be any improvement in the relationship between the two countries. From its point of view, China has offered mainly developing countries its own authoritarian state capitalism model as the key proven recipe for development success over the past decades, together with the insistence that national sovereignty and non-interference in domestic affairs form the bedrock and the only basis for international relations. Second point is that each side have been very active in building up partnership and alliances to strengthen their own position. And it seems that both sides have made success in the recent past. Under Biden, which moved away from the unilateralism of Trump, they have to consult, try to mobilize like-minded nations in Europe, in Asia, to push back against China's human rights records. And they had success in recent months. China on its own has been very active in mobilizing developing countries, particularly those participating in its Belt and Road Initiative. And we see that majority of those have come to China's defense when it was criticized by Western countries at the UN and other UN fora. In fact, compared to the previous Cold War, this time around, the US and the West seems to be on the defensive. Over the past 15 years, according to Freedom House, more and more people are living in countries facing a deterioration of democratic conditions. And last year, almost 75% of the world population lives in such condition. Of particular concern is the fact that the US itself over the same period faced a downgrading of 14 index points of the Freedom House Index, losing much of its soft power that it used to enjoy in the past. And last but not least, like Charles has emphasized, the contention between the US and China and their allies have spread throughout different spheres of international relations, from economic to politics to technology to military. And in fact, rising tension in the South and East China Seas is a really cause for concern, setting the stage for armed conflict through mistake, misunderstanding, or miscalculation. In fact, the Taiwan Strait has been labeled as the most dangerous place on earth by The Economist magazine. So for the remainders of my remarks, I will focus on the economic dimension of this new Cold War, which will dominate the whole of the activities in the future. This economic contention has taken place in the retreating phase of globalization. According to the Bertelsmann Foundation, which published the Globalization report every year, since 2007, around the time of the previous financial crisis, globalization measured as not only trade and investment flow, but exchange of idea, cultural exchanges, flow of people, and so on, have been on the decline and continue to do so. And I think that the key policy and actions by the US and China, and to some lesser extent by other countries, will contribute to this deterioration of the prospect for globalization going forward. From the China's point of view, the key strategy that it has formulated to deal with the situation is a so-called dual circulation strategy. Even though many observers have termed it nothing more than a new form of protectionism, I believe that that is wrong. It is basically an effort by China to seek a more balanced growth by promoting domestic growth impulses, particularly including self-sufficiency in high technology and security and energy and food. And in this regard, they have already made some progresses in the sense that foreign trade as a sum of export and import as a ratio of GDP has declined significantly for China from 65% in 2016 down to only 35% at the moment. It's a significant change that many people might not be aware of. At that ratio, China is a little bit more depending on foreign trade than the US, which is a closed economy, but much less open than the European Union. They also have been successful in diversifying their foreign trade relation to be less dependent on the US. Basically, at this moment, trade with the US, the EU, and the ASEAN country in Asia are more or less of the same proportion, with the biggest part and the most dynamic part of China's foreign trade driven by trade with the Belt and Road Initiative participating countries. More important than that, China seeks in its international circulation part to promote international trade, but on its terms, in the sense that it wants to increase the made in China content in its export. And here, it has also made progress in the past few years. If you look at the share of foreign value added in China's export over 2014 to 2018, it has reduced that share by 3.5 percentage points to be around 15%, which is equivalent to the US. At the same time, it has managed to increase the share of Chinese value added in the export of third countries to be around 30%, 30%, again, a little bit less on the US, but way ahead of the European Union. So in other words, China is changing its economy, become more domestically oriented, but increase its value added in international economic transactions. Its import composition has clearly moving toward importing high-tech capital goods, sophisticated branded consumers goods, and then the rest is raw materials and commodities. Such China's economic pattern and behavior will have huge implications for the world, particularly for developing countries, which I will refer to in the conclusion and summing up. For the US, under Trump, the key word is decoupling and reshoring, and both elements have been subsumed under President Biden's Build Back Better slogan. Decoupling in the past few years has proven to be quite complicated and nuanced, because with a global economy well integrated and global supply chain, it is not easy to decouple, and the cost of doing so is very high for own country involved. So what we have seen so far is really a decoupling between the US and China, where bilateral trade and investment flow have indeed declined by double-digit percentage point over the past few years. But overall, they traded more and they have investment engagement more with the rest of the world. So that globally, from the point of view of trade and deficit or surplus, US and China overall doesn't change, but the bilateral relationship has changed. So basically at the cost of the two countries, but to the benefit of the third countries. The key point here is to say that in certain area, particularly high tech, the decoupling is becoming more and more visible, particularly in semiconductors and advanced computer chips, telecom equipment and accessories, where the reduction in trade between US and China has been very pronounced. But more important and more troublesome for international businesses is the ban by the US on third countries companies from using US sourced product and intellectual property in making products and services to sell to China. And this injunction has been maintained by the Biden administration, and I think probably will be strengthened as well going forward. Will put many companies in a very difficult spot, eventually leading to a bifurcation of the global supply chain into one, namely in China for China, and another one outside of China for the rest of the world and the US. And this bifurcation in the high-tech area spreading to other areas will have, again, huge implication for the economic efficiency of our global economy. Reshoring, again, is facing the same deeper understanding and nuancing, in the sense that it is really not reshoring back to the home country, but part of the wider global diversification or right shoring effort to reduce dependence on China, particularly for critical strategic and medical goods, but also to be closer to key consumer markets, affecting exploitation of low labor costs and productivity of the countries. So basically, some countries benefited from this globalization, diversification and right shoring, but many will be left out. We see again the reduction in US-China trade, but increased trade with the Asian countries and some European countries. So to sum up, we will see at the result of this development two key implications going forward. First, for developing countries, only a few will benefit from this diversification effort. As I mentioned before, countries in East Asia, some country in Central and Eastern European area, and country closer to the US like Mexico. They will benefit, as have been the case in terms of attracting FDI flow to use them as the basis for production to support the rest of the world. Many other developing countries, and here is a majority of them, and typically Africa, will suffer because they face reduction in the opportunity to use manufacturing for export as a means to modernize and really drive growth for the economy, like the East Asian tigers were able to do 20, 30 years ago. And they are being forced already to fall back on dependence on commodity export, which is volatile and which prevent them from being able to upgrade their economic structure. For multinational companies, they also face more and more the impact of sanctions and counter sanctions between US and China. If they do business with one, to the displeasure of the other, they will face increasing political pressure. And more than just pressure from Chinese and US government in terms of sanctions, they also face pressure from their own consumer and investor base, penalizing them if they do business with countries disapproved or disagreed to by the consumer base. And here we have concrete example of what they are facing at the moment. One is the controversy over the use of the boycott of cotton being produced by forced labor in Xinjiang. Some companies boycott cotton, again, to face anti-pressure from Chinese consumers and Chinese government. Another example is the respect of the repressive security law that China passed in Hong Kong. Again, companies are being forced to either support it so that they can do business in Hong Kong, or doing so facing backlash from their international customer base. And last but not least is the upcoming Winter Olympic Games in Beijing early next year. Companies sponsoring the game are being also under pressure to boycott the game. So I give this example to show that going forward, both countries, particularly developing countries and multinational companies, will face increasing difficulty in doing businesses, raising the cost of doing business in the international economy. So the end result would be these bifurcation, division, competition, high cost of doing business will lead to a further decline in the global potential growth rate of the global economy. The World Bank recently downgraded its forecast for potential growth in the next 10 years down to 1.7%, down from the 2.4% estimate made in 2019, just before the pandemic. The risk is that with this Cold War impacting economic activity, we may face an even lower global growth rate in the future, which will make all of our existing division, social problem, difficulties, and so on, even more difficult and more intractable to solve. So with that, I conclude and give the floor back to Yavuz.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Yes, of course, it is not going to be very easy to shape in the future, as far as I understand, because we have multidimensional problems. It is the reality that we are facing with multidimensional problems, and those problems might occur in different areas. And everything that you have mentioned actually is like a different topic for different sessions. And we, of course, want to underline these important topics you have mentioned, and we want to create a question mark among the public sphere. Thank you so much. Now I want to give the floor to a very, very prominent name, Professor İlter Turan. Now I'll give the floor to him before asking him what lessons should we learn out of this panel. But before that question, we want to listen to his comment about Turkey and the world, the future of the world as a socio-economist person. I don't know about your branch, how to describe it, because you are a multi-dimensional professor, so the floor is yours. Esteemed moderator, thank you very much. As you all know, people who organize these panels did not attain a specific topic to each of us. But in these presentations, I thought that every presentation was actually completing one another. It was like a complementary. It was perfect because Hakan Ateş started in a way that he talked about the effects of the pandemics, and then Mr. Dallara talked about some instruments, but those instruments might have some long-term problems. And George Hugo also mentioned if capitalism does not change its content, many more challenges will also occur. And also, our last speaker, Mr. Tran, mentioned the competition among world countries, China and Russia. So he mentioned some possible consequences of this competition among countries for all of us. So if you allow me, I'll just want to a long-term perspective. And Mr. Charles Dallara mentioned the crystal ball. We don't have the crystal ball, unfortunately, in our hands. But if I look at the past, if I speak retrospectively, yes, the change has multi dimensions and everybody has their own perspective. So the ones who discovered the United States, America, I guess they found tomato and potato. I think tomato or potato didn't matter, but I guess discovery of America and tomato and potato, these three important things actually impacted the population of the whole world. Because if tomato or potato had not been discovered, I mean, the population of the world wouldn't be at this state. And golden and also silver were discovered in the back. And then they figured out the importance of it in the Ottoman era. And they then saw an unprecedented inflation. And Soviet Unions, for instance, it yes collapsed, but nobody imagined it. So yes, of course, we cannot see what is going on in the future, but we might have some anticipations. These are some guesses. Yes, we've talked about globalization. So anti-globalization is getting very, very prevalent in our day. And this anti-globalism is like a populist approach. And this populist anti-globalists think that their political elites are very much detached from their own communities and they are indifferent to their public's problems. These are some allegations, maybe complaints, and they are not actually wrong. We cannot say that they are not wrong. And people in that respect were actually underestimated. They were described as some not smart people who cannot read the future. I think there are two important problems here. So one of them is that there's an increasing importation, and because of that, there is this unemployment problem. So the Make America Greater Again light on that concern, and the same concern again appears in other countries. And the second issue is maybe relevant to that. There are some countries who are distorting the international competition and the migrants. Work migration, labor migration is a threat for global and fair competition. And also, developments on the technology might also weaken the potential of the ordinary people, and they might be actually prison to the continuous unemployment. So these are some of the things that we can add to the list of concerns for the anti-globalists' perspective. So the ones who actually are in favor of globalism should be defending their course. Otherwise, they will be defeated by these anti-globalists. And on the other area, yes, COVID pandemic also collapsed the state's side, which did not attach importance to the social side of their situation. Yes, many countries are trying to eliminate the consequences of the pandemic, and social state approach is going to be much more stronger in the future. So the thing that I'm trying to emphasize here is that, yes, Mr. Dallara mentioned very well concerns, and he is definitely right. And one way or another, states should understand that everything is not going to be managed by them, and they should protect the market economy. They should take precautions which will protect the market economy, and they should of course compensate the losses of the market economy. And maybe we can also add the methods for softening the technological changes. When I talk about this, of course, can't say that this current administrative structure is going to be eliminated, but rather than believing in the market economy, we can say that states can assume the role of the market economy, which can only be solved by the state, because capitalist economy, which is involving every stakeholder, could also be another possible solution. Yes, this pandemic is actually leading countries to protect themselves in a way that they are jealous. So we need global cooperation. Yes, we bear witness to that. This is the reality. So in that sense, maybe we can soften the anti-globalism. However, the pandemic showed us that solving global problems is not possible with a globalization which alienates and excludes nation states. We have to have international cooperation. So here we actually see the nation state way is much more prominent. Even though we criticize this structure, nation states are the way that the governments, that the countries are operated, and there's political democracy in the developed countries. But the political democracy, if countries want the democracy to be their administrative method, they should be aware of there are certain problems against their democracy. For instance, this is a valid problem, which is the political fragmentation problem for each and every democracy. Because in the first periods that democracy developed, there was a dilemma between capital and labor. And so the number of the labor was used to balance the way of the capitalism. And at the end, social state idea was created, but the social state services become natural, of course, and people then started to think of some narrow courses, cases maybe, and almost in each every democracy in our day, votes are shared among many more parties. In the United States, there's two main parties bringing different parties together. Even in those countries, we can see some cracks in the structures of those political parties. Of course, the reason for it, as I've tried to mention it beforehand, is the transition to post-industry period, because class-based policy making was terminated and the special groups which were defending courses, cases, increased their importance. So the decision-making processes became much more challenging, and especially decisions guessing or forecasting longer terms became much harder to take. So people think that states are indifferent to the problems of their citizens, and maybe a solution could be narrowing down the authorities of the central units, and maybe local units, authorities could be much more enlarged. And our first speaker from the EBRD mentioned the importance of localization, the localization as well. It is not between global and local, but inside our nations, between national and local, maybe we can prioritize local as well. It can only be possible in that way. So this is the prescription here that we have in front of us. But I believe that prescription here is going to make international cooperation more challenging. So what can we expect from the future? There is this dilemma here in front of us. On one side, we try to get over the international problems, and nation states cooperation is needed. And on the other side, nation states are getting weaker and weaker, and their will to solve the problems with international cooperation is getting even more vulnerable. It is not possible to see how to solve this dilemma, but maybe we can have some kind of a collaboration to solve that problem. So the states, nation states, if they want to be globalized, they need to understand that their structure is going to be much more weakened. But of course, managing the pandemic and managing some international problems could only be possible with international support. And there's the role of the nation state to provide the welfare, and this is of course their main role. But as I've stated before, and nation states are getting weaker and weaker, and they have some problems in putting long-term policies into implementation. Especially we have a populist challenge in this era. For that reason, those nation states are finding it very difficult to turn their faces into international cooperation. Yes, unfortunately, we have not a very good scenario in front of us, but humanity has had the chance to solve many problems in the past. But of course, maybe this is just a pessimistic note. I just want to add this. There is something we have to be afraid of. In the past, there were some bottlenecks on the international levels. They were only coped with wars. But if we have the war today, when it was over, there would not be a world that we could live in. So this is a very challenging period that we are going through. And at the end, I just want to conclude my words. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Thank you. You have given us a great wrap up like we had expected. So you were both saying optimist solution ways are possible, and cold and hot war possibilities are not going to be possible as well. You said that because it will bring some destructive consequences, because you said that if there comes a war, then we will not have a world to live in, because there are many destructive wars, weapons. And we have already actually finalized the session, but I just want to say a word. Generally, the analysts have put forward this statement. This is, of course, paving way for the future, but it is, of course, going to be a very challenging mission. As of the first day of this world, humanity has come across with many problems, like health problems, Spanish flu, influenza, and many pandemics, and 150 million people lost their lives. There were many financial crises, many countries, and many companies actually just went into bankruptcies, and many wars took place. But Annemarie mentioned it very significantly, that we have a growing problem in front of us, but we don't have any experience how to respond to that. We don't know what to do, and which is, of course, you all have underlined very briefly, which is the climate change. Yes, climate change, because the world, the humanity, has not any experience about this. We don't know what's going to happen, whether it is going to eliminate humanity or the world altogether. So in this kind of an environment, it is not about fighting or else competing with one another. We can only find a solution with collaboration and cooperation. Maybe this is the message for the politicians and the administrators. We have to make more collaboration. We have to be much more inclusive. So the ones who say the end of the capitalism has come, no, the end of the capitalism has not come. Capitalism needs to be domesticized. Yes, it must be much more domesticized. This is what we need. As far as I see, we all agree this important idea. I just want to thank all of you one by one. Thank you so much for your participation, contribution. This is the end of our session, and I hope that we have just 2 years for 2023, 2022-2023, and I hope that in our 100th anniversary, our Republican anniversary, and Forum Istanbul's 22nd anniversary will be celebrated all together in a physical environment. I hope will have reached to better days all together. Thank you so much for your participation, Charles, Dallara, George, Ajum, and Tran, and dear Professor and Hakan Ateş. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Annemarie Stafford. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you. Thank you, and goodbye, and stay healthy. I guess we have an award ceremony. I guess we will remain here.
So if I have the floor, I begin. Distinguished participants, distinguished audience. I once again would like to send my great esteems. Mr. Ajan, I cannot hear you. All right. We have to click on the Korean button, I suppose. All right, now it works. So Ajan, you still couldn't learn how to speak in Korean. Well, I tried to learn, but it doesn't happen. Okay, in the beginning you were talking. They're dialectically Korean and Turkish are alike, but it seems a little bit distant to me.
He would be a good sort of associate member for us.
So, distinguished participants, I once again would like to welcome you once again. Forum Istanbul has a wonderful tradition, and as a result of this tradition, we make we give rewards to the names
we should try to
honor them.
Around. There are a few people I know who are working on this space,
but
individually. We should not necessarily make them full members as we do with the profit sharing system. We might make them associate members.
And we are right now making this ceremony of award. But I would like to first, I am going to deliver a reward. This is the Life Achievement Award. But of course, when we talk about Life Achievement Award, there are different types of course, candidates. And we have worked upon it for a long period of time. My dear friend and my dear colleague, Hakan Ateş, is awarded with this reward. And with great pleasure and honor, I have been commissioned to give this reward. And I take on this mission with great honor. Mr. Hakan, of course, has been in the sector of banking for more than 40 years. He started first in İşbank and later on in Interbank, later on Bank Express, in which we also worked together as a general director. And then also he was assigned to Moscow and opened up a bank. On 1997, he became the founding general director of DenizBank. I can remember the first day with a license, with a piece of paper in Swiss Hotel, in a room of Swiss Hotel. It was the bank's general directorate room. And he started up there. Of course, almost 25 years has passed so far. And DenizBank has first started with one single team and with one single license, and has achieved such, of course, achievement. And they have changed 4 partners, and Mr. Hakan and his team, DenizBank, Deniz Finansal Financial Services. He was a CEO as a financial director in 4 periods, and it's not very possible to see such an achievement around the world, and I believe that it can be a great example. And of course, Mr. Hakan not only is competent in banking system, but on the other hand, he is also an artist. He is dubbing, and he has a wonderful voice, and that is the reason why he also can compose the music himself. And we also watched it. By the way, I also feel very proud about. By the way, we are graduate from the same high school in Ankara, and he's also a member of the executive board in education of the Ankara College. On the other hand, he gives very much value to his friends, his colleagues. He gives very much importance to art, and he always motivates his team, friends, colleagues. And on the other hand, is also paying a lot of effort in order for the training and education of the young population of Turkey. And that is the reason why I believe that he really deserves this reward. And it's an honor for me to deliver this reward to him. And I would like to congratulate you once again, and I leave the floor to him. If not, I just want to stand up if I'm not out of the screen. And the new normal is actually become very, very efficient logistically, because I received my reward yesterday evening by logistics. And on the other hand, and my general director, Mr. Ajlan Acar, has sent my reward to you, Mr. Yavuz Canevi, and also Mr. İlter Turan. I accept this Life Achievement Award with great pride, and I feel gratitude. And Mr. Ajlan, you have made a wonderful brief summary. I have started the sector of banking when I was approximately 22 years old. I'm almost completing my 41st year, and I have made different types. I have undertaken different duties, and I was very lucky to have the opportunity to work in different fields and had the opportunity to meet with masters such as yourself. And first and foremost, and I'm going to keep this reward in the most precious part in my office, and later at my home when I'm retired. And I also would like to thank the jury, to Forum Istanbul, and particularly a think tank platform as an NGO that has given me this reward. I really would like to thank you. Thank you. So, President, Mr. Chair, I suppose this was my duty, and I give the floor to you, Mr. Yavuz Canevi. Yes, in this year's program, we were always thinking about this, but this was first this year that we decided to actually put this category, rewarding tech category. This is the tree of Republic. the stem of the Republic. As you know, this adventure started in 2001, and we said that 2023, up until 2023, as the 100th year of the foundation of the Turkish Republic, we are going to celebrate it as well, and we have exceeded 20 years as well, as it is said before. And in the last 3 years, we wanted to give a reward to those who have really contributed to the Republic, the Turkish Republic, and that is the reason why we decided to give the reward of a sycamore. It is regarded as a sycamore tree, a Marjai Kaidan. In this year's meeting, we decided to actually deliver the reward physically, but due to the pandemic, unfortunately, we lost them in the beginning of this year, and we wish that we could have had the opportunity to deliver the rewards to them as they were alive. But in order to keep them in our memories, we are also in contact with their relatives, their assistants, and also their institutions, and we had the opportunity to actually achieve it. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. There is a technical problem, I guess. Just after this wonderful introduction, they are asking that we give the reward of a sycamore tomorrow, because the technical team couldn't actually accept the legal relatives to the panel, unfortunately. Okay, that's fine, but at least we could have the opportunity to tell about the presentation, to tell our actually wish. Then in another meeting tomorrow, we are going to deliver the reward. We would like to thank all the participants, also the organization, and we have completed the day. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was a wonderful speech. Thank you very much.